The cellar door stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. "Get in the cellar," her father said, his voice flat, distant. "They're almost here." Abigail didn't ask who. She already knew. Everyone in the valley knew when riders came at dusk with no lanterns lit. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, fingers gripping the rough wood of the doorframe. The cellar smelled like dirt and old potatoes, the kind of dark that swallowed sound. Her younger brother, Samuel, was already down there, pressed into the corner with his knees pulled to his chest. "Papa." "Now, Abby." She descended. The stairs creaked under her boots. Her father didn't follow. Instead, he closed the door above her head with a slow, deliberate motion, and she heard the scrape of the latch sliding into place. Then silence. Samuel's breathing was loud in the dark. Abigail sat beside him on the cold dirt floor, her hand finding his. His fingers were ice. "It's all right," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. Above them, the house was still, too still, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears until you heard your own heartbeat like a drum. Then, hoofbeats, not one horse, many. Abigail's breath caught. Samuel's grip tightened until her knuckles ached. The riders stopped outside. Voices followed, muffled through the floorboards, but sharp enough to carry tone. Her father's voice, steady but strained. Another man's voice, colder, smoother. "We're here for the girl, Garrett." Abigail's stomach twisted. "She's not here," her father said. A pause. Then boots on the porch. Heavy, slow, deliberate. "You know why we're here. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She didn't do anything. That's not what the law says." The law. Abigail pressed her palm over her mouth. The man speaking wasn't just any rider. It was Sheriff Kane, the same man who'd stood in their parlor 2 weeks ago with a folded paper in his hand, calling it a warrant. Calling her a thief. She wasn't. But the truth didn't matter when the man holding the pen had already decided. "You hiding her, Garrett?" Kane's voice was closer now, just inside the doorway. "That'd make you complicit. You want that?" Her father didn't answer. Abigail heard something crash, glass, maybe a jar, then boots again, moving through the house. Searching. Samuel started to shake. She pulled him closer, her own heart hammering so loud she was sure they'd hear it through the floor. The cellar door rattled. Abigail froze. "What's down there?" Kane asked. "Storage," her father said quickly. "Potatoes, jars, nothing worth your time. Open it. It's locked from the outside. I don't have the—" The door rattled again, harder this time. Then a pause. Footsteps retreated slightly. "Torch it," Kane said. Abigail's blood went cold. "Wait!" Her father's voice cracked. "Wait. She's not even here. She left yesterday, went north to her aunt's place. You can check the road, ask. Then you won't mind if we take a look around." More footsteps, more crashes. Abigail heard her mother's voice now, high and frantic, pleading. Then a slap, sharp and final. Silence. Samuel buried his face against Abigail's shoulder. She held him, her mind racing. If they burned the house, the cellar would fill with smoke. They'd suffocate before they burned. But the fire didn't come. Instead, the boots returned to the cellar door. A long scrape, metal on metal, the latch lifting. Light spilled down the stairs, blinding after the dark. Abigail threw up a hand to shield her eyes, but it was too late. A silhouette stood at the top, broad-shouldered and still. Sheriff Kane. Behind him, her father, hands raised, face pale. Well, Kane said slowly, descending the stairs one at a time. Looks like storage to me. Abigail pulled Samuel behind her, rising to her feet. Her legs shook, but she kept her chin up. Kane stopped 3 steps from the bottom. His eyes settled on her, cold and gray like river stones. "Abigail Garrett," he said, "you're coming with me." "She didn't steal anything," her father said from the doorway, his voice breaking. "That land deed was signed over fair and square. You know it was. That's for a judge to decide. There is no judge. You're the law here, and you've already made up your mind." Kane's jaw tightened. "Careful, Garrett." Abigail's hands curled into fists. The land deed. That's what this was about. The 40 acres her grandfather left her when he died. Acres that bordered Kane's property. Acres he'd wanted for years. He'd forged a new deed, called hers a fake, and now he was using the law to take what he couldn't buy. "You can't do this," Abigail said, her voice steadier than she felt. Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just did." He gestured to someone behind him. 2 men appeared at the top of the stairs, rifles slung over their shoulders. They descended, their faces blank. "Take her," Kane said. The first man reached for Abigail's arm. She jerked back, but there was nowhere to go. The cellar walls pressed close. Samuel cried out, grabbing her sleeve. "Don't touch her!" her father shouted, lunging forward. One of the men turned and drove the butt of his rifle into her father's stomach. He crumpled, gasping. "Papa!" Abigail screamed. The man grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. She fought, kicking, clawing, but his grip was iron. The second man grabbed Samuel, pulling him away. "Leave him alone!" Abigail shouted. "He's just a boy." "Shut up," the man said, and shoved her toward the stairs. Kane watched from above, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Abigail stumbled up the stairs, dragged by rough hands. Her father lay on the floor behind her, wheezing. Her mother stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Outside, the other riders waited. 6 of them, maybe more. Their horses stamped and snorted in the fading light. Kane stepped past Abigail, moving toward his own horse. He mounted in one smooth motion, then looked down at her. "Tie her hands," he said. One of the men pulled a length of rope from his saddlebag. Abigail's wrists were yanked behind her back, the rope biting into her skin. "Where are you taking her?" her father called from the doorway, still bent over, clutching his ribs. Kane didn't answer. He turned his horse and started down the road. The men followed, dragging Abigail with them. She looked back once. Her father stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the house. Her mother beside him, one hand pressed to her mouth. Samuel's face appeared in the window, small and pale. Then the riders picked up speed, and the house disappeared behind the trees. Abigail stumbled, her boots catching on stones. The man holding the rope didn't slow. She fell to her knees, dirt biting into her skin, and he yanked her back to her feet without a word. The sun dropped below the hills. Darkness closed in, and somewhere ahead, Abigail heard the distant sound of screaming. They rode for an hour before the screaming grew louder. Abigail's wrists ached, the rope slick with blood where it had rubbed her skin raw. Her legs burned from stumbling over roots and rocks, dragged along behind the horses like a dog on a leash. The riders didn't speak. Kane led them through the valley, past the burned-out shell of the old Mason farm. past the creek where Abigail used to fish with her grandfather. The screaming came from the ridge ahead. It wasn't one voice, it was many. Abigail's stomach turned. She knew that ridge. Everyone did. It was where the auctions happened. Even now, 4 years after the war ended. Shadowy auctions like this still thrived in hidden clearings. The law turned a blind eye. Or worse, participated. Men like Cain built fortunes selling people the government claimed were free. The trees opened into a wide clearing, lit by torches staked into the ground. A crowd had gathered, maybe 30 people, all men. At the center stood a wooden platform, rough-hewn and weathered, and on the platform, a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her dress was torn, her hair matted with dirt. Her wrists were bound to a post behind her, arms stretched back at an unnatural angle. "Next one," the auctioneer called, his voice carrying over the noise. 16 years old, strong back, no family, no husband. Bid starts at $20. The girl didn't look up. She stared at the ground, her body trembling. Abigail's breath caught. Cain dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. He walked toward the platform, boots crunching on gravel. "Hold her here," he said, gesturing to Abigail. The man holding her rope jerked her to a stop. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her legs shaking, watching as Cain climbed onto the platform. The auctioneer grinned. "Sheriff, good to see you." "Got another one for you," Cain said, glancing back at Abigail. "Bring her up." The man yanked the rope. Abigail stumbled forward, her boots scraping against the dirt. The crowd turned to look. She'd never felt so exposed. Cain gestured to the post where the other girl was tied. "Put her there." "Wait!" Abigail's voice cracked. "You can't—" The man shoved her forward. She fell to her knees on the platform, the wood splintering under her palms. "Get up," Cain said. She didn't move. He grabbed her by the hair and hauled her to her feet. Pain shot through her scalp. She bit back a cry. The crowd murmured. Cain tied her wrists to the post beside the other girl, pulling the knots tight. Abigail's shoulders screamed in protest. "2 for the price of 1, the auctioneer called, his grin widening. "Who wants to start?" Abigail's vision blurred. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the rope was real. The post was real. The men staring at her like she was livestock. They were real. $30, someone shouted from the crowd. 35. 40. Abigail closed her eyes. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, steady and sure. "You stand for something, Abby, or you fall for anything." She opened her eyes and saw him, a man at the edge of the crowd, half hidden in shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low over his face. He wasn't bidding, he was just watching. Something about him felt familiar. $50, another voice called. The auctioneer pointed. 50 to the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 60? The man in the shadow stepped forward into the torchlight. Abigail's breath stopped. She knew that face. Older now, weathered by years and sun, but unmistakable. Caleb Thorne, her grandfather's ranch hand. The man who'd worked their land for 15 years before he disappeared the night her grandfather died. The night the original deed vanished. Abigail's heart hammered. Caleb's eyes met hers across the clearing, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Guilt. Then he looked away. 60, he said, his voice low and rough. The crowd turned. The auctioneer hesitated, then nodded. 60 to the gentleman. Do I hear 70? Silence. Kane stepped forward, arms crossed. 70. Abigail's stomach dropped. Caleb's jaw tightened. 80. 100. Kane said flatly. The crowd went quiet. $100 was more than most men made in 6 months. Caleb stared at Kane, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. 150. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kane's eyes narrowed. You got that kind of money, Thorne? I do. Then show it. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He tossed it onto the platform. It landed with a heavy thud, coins spilling across the wood. The auctioneer counted quickly, his fingers flying. Then he grinned. $150. Sold to Mr. Thorne. Kane's face darkened, but he didn't move. Caleb climbed onto the platform and cut Abigail's ropes with a knife pulled from his belt. Her wrists fell free, numb and throbbing. She stumbled and he caught her arm, steadying her. Don't say anything, he murmured. Not here. Abigail stared at him, her mind racing. He'd left the night her grandfather died, the night everything fell apart, and now he was here. What about the other one? Someone called from the crowd. The auctioneer glanced at the girl still tied to the post. Still available. Bidding starts at. I'll take her too, Caleb said. The auctioneer blinked. That'll be another. I know what it'll be. Caleb pulled another pouch from his coat and tossed it onto the platform. The auctioneer counted again, slower this time, his grin fading. Sold, he said finally. Caleb cut the girl's ropes. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He lifted her gently, carrying her down from the platform. Abigail followed, her legs weak, her mind spinning. The crowd parted as they passed. Kane watched from the platform, his expression cold and still. Caleb didn't look back. He led them to a horse tied at the edge of the clearing, lifting the girl onto the saddle before turning to Abigail. Can you ride? He asked. She nodded, though she wasn't sure. He helped her up behind the girl, then mounted in front. The horse shifted under the weight, snorting. Thorne, Kane called. Caleb turned. You just made a very expensive mistake. Caleb's hand rested on the reins, steady. Wouldn't be my first. He nudged the horse forward, and they rode into the dark. Behind them, the torches flickered. The crowd dispersed, and Kane stood alone on the platform, watching them disappear. They rode until the torches were nothing but distant fireflies behind them. Caleb didn't speak. The girl in front of Abigail had stopped crying, but her breathing was still ragged, uneven. Abigail's wrists throbbed, her shoulders aching from hours tied to the post. The moon hung low and pale, casting long shadows across the valley. The horse moved at a steady pace, its hooves muffled by the soft dirt of the trail. Finally, Caleb pulled the horse to a stop near a cluster of cottonwoods. A small cabin sat nestled among the trees, half hidden by overgrown brush. Smoke curled from the chimney. We'll stay here tonight, Caleb said, dismounting. He lifted the girl down first, then reached for Abigail. She slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling when her boots hit the ground. Caleb steadied her. You all right? She pulled away. Why did you leave? His jaw tightened. Not now. You disappeared the night my grandfather died. The deed disappeared with you, and now you show up here buying me like... I didn't buy you, Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. I paid to get you out. That's the same thing. No, it's not. Abigail opened her mouth to argue, but the girl beside her swayed. her eyes rolling back. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms. "Inside," he said. The cabin was small but clean. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across rough wooden walls. A cot sat in the corner, covered with worn blankets. Caleb laid the girl on the cot, pulling the blankets over her. She didn't wake. Abigail stood near the door, her arms wrapped around herself. "Who is she?" "Don't know," Caleb said, crouching by the fire. "Does it matter? You paid $300 for two people you don't know. I know you. You knew me 8 years ago." He looked up, his face shadowed. "You think I forgot? I think you ran." Caleb stood slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. "I didn't run, Abby. I was sent away." She blinked. "What?" "Your grandfather sent me away the night he died. Gave me the deed and told me to hide it. Said Kane was coming for it, and if I stayed, we'd both end up dead." Abigail's breath caught. "You're lying." "I'm not." "Then where is it? Where's the deed?" Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He held it out. Abigail stared at it, her heart pounding. She took it with trembling hands, unfolding it carefully. Her grandfather's signature was at the bottom, clear and unmistakable. Above it, her name, Abigail Marie Garrett. 40 acres, Valley Ridge. Tears blurred her vision. "You've had this the whole time?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you come back? Why didn't you?" "Because your grandfather made me promise not to. Not until you were old enough to fight for it. Not until you were ready." "I was ready 8 years ago." "No, you weren't." Caleb's voice softened. "Neither was I." Abigail's hands shook. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to demand answers she wasn't sure he could give. But before she could speak, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the trees. Caleb's head snapped toward the door. "Get down." "What? Now?" He grabbed her arm and pulled her to the floor, pressing her against the wall beside the hearth. The girl on the cot stirred but didn't wake. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Caleb moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. His jaw tightened. "How many?" Abigail whispered. 6, maybe more. "It's Kane. I know." The horses stopped outside. Boots hit the ground, heavy and deliberate. A voice called out, smooth and cold. "Thorn, I know you're in there." Caleb didn't answer. "You made a fool of me tonight," Kane continued. "Took something that wasn't yours to take. Now I'm here to collect." Abigail's heart hammered. She looked at Caleb, but his expression was unreadable. "Come out," Kane said, "or I'll burn you out." Caleb's hand moved to the rifle leaning against the wall. He checked the chamber, his movements slow and practiced. "You can't fight them all," Abigail whispered. "I don't plan to." He moved to the door, cracking it open just enough to speak through. "You don't want to do this, Kane." "Don't I?" Kane's voice was closer now, just outside. "You cost me $300 tonight, and you took what's mine. She was never yours. That's not how the law sees it. The law's a lie, and you know it." A pause. Then Kane's voice, colder than before. "Step outside, Thorn, or I'll drag you out." Caleb glanced back at Abigail. Something passed between them, an understanding, silent and sharp. He opened the door and stepped out. Abigail lunged forward, but he'd already closed it behind him. She pressed her ear to the wood, her breath catching. "There he is," Kane said. "The hero." "I'm no hero," Caleb said quietly. "Just a man who's tired of watching you destroy good people. Noble, but stupid. A gunshot cracked through the night. Abigail screamed. But it wasn't Caleb who fell. Through the window, she saw one of Cain's men crumple, clutching his shoulder. Another gunshot followed, then another, not from Caleb's rifle, but from the trees. Riders emerged from the darkness. A dozen or more. Ranch hands, farmers, men Abigail recognized from town. They surrounded Cain's men, rifles raised. At the front rode an older man with silver hair and a weathered face. He reined his horse to a stop and looked down at Cain. "Evening, Sheriff," the man said. "Seems like you're a long way from town." Cain's face went white. The man smiled, cold and thin. "Name's Dutch Callahan. I believe you know my daughter." He nodded toward the cabin, toward the girl on the cot. Cain's hand moved toward his gun, but Dutch raised his rifle. "I wouldn't," Dutch said. The clearing went still. "So let me ask you this. If you were Caleb, would you have opened that door? Would you have stepped out knowing you might not step back in?" Pour yourself a cup of tea. Take a deep breath, and think about what it costs to stand for something when the whole world's already decided you're going to fall. If you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. Tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether you think Cain walks away from this alive. The riders didn't lower their rifles. Cain stood in the clearing, his men frozen around him. Dutch Callahan's horse stamped once, the sound sharp in the stillness. "My daughter," Dutch said again, his voice steady. "The one you sold tonight." "Third time in 2 years. Cain's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. "See? The first time I didn't know where she'd gone," Dutch continued. "Thought maybe she ran off. Second time I started asking questions. Found out you'd been running auctions out here for years. Selling people the government says are free. I enforce the law," Cain said, his voice thin. "You are the law. That's the problem." Dutch dismounted, handing his reins to the man beside him. He walked toward Cain, slow and deliberate, his rifle still raised. "You took my daughter 3 times, Dutch said. "Sold her to men who treated her like livestock. And every time I bought her back. Cost me everything I had." He stopped a few feet from Cain, his eyes cold. "But tonight, someone else got to her first." Dutch glanced toward the cabin. Caleb stood in the doorway, his rifle lowered but still in his hands. "You know this man?" Dutch asked. "I know him," Cain said. "Good. Then you know he's not someone you want to cross." Cain's face darkened. "This isn't over, Callahan." "Yes," Dutch said quietly. "It is." He gestured to his men. "Take their guns, all of them." The ranch hands moved forward, disarming Cain's men one by one. Cain didn't resist, but his eyes burned with fury. "You're making a mistake," Cain said. "The only mistake I made," Dutch replied, "was letting you live this long." He turned and walked back to his horse. The ranch hands followed, their rifles still trained on Cain. "Come sunrise," Dutch called over his shoulder. "You're gone. Out of this valley. If I see you again, I won't be so generous." He mounted and rode into the trees. The others followed, disappearing into the dark. Cain stood alone in the clearing, his men beside him, unarmed and silent. Caleb watched from the doorway, until they too turned and rode away. Then he lowered his rifle and stepped back inside. Abigail sat on the floor beside the cot, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of water. The girl, Dutch's daughter, was awake now, her eyes red but clear. Thank you, the girl whispered. Abigail nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb crouched by the fire, adding another log. The flames crackled, filling the silence. You should have told me, Abigail said finally. Caleb didn't look up. Would you have believed me? I don't know. He sat back on his heels, staring into the fire. Your grandfather was a good man. Best I ever knew. But he was also careful. He knew what Cain was capable of. He knew if he left that deed with you, Cain would come for it. And for you. So he sent you away instead. He gave me a choice. Protect the deed or protect you. I couldn't do both. Abigail's throat tightened. He should have told me. Maybe, but he thought he was protecting you. He was wrong. Caleb looked at her, his expression soft. Yeah, he was. The girl on the cot shifted, pulling the blanket tighter. My father will be back for me in the morning, she said quietly. He always comes back. Abigail reached over and squeezed her hand. You're safe now. Am I? The girl's voice cracked. Cain's still out there. He'll come back too. He always does. Not this time, Caleb said. The girl looked at him, her eyes searching. You can't know that. No, Caleb admitted. But I can make sure he regrets it if he tries. Silence settled over the cabin, heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, carrying the faint scent of rain. Abigail unfolded the deed again, running her fingers over her grandfather's signature. 8 years. 8 years she'd believed it was lost. 8 years she'd fought to prove it existed. And now it was here, in her hands. What will you do? Caleb asked. I don't know, Abigail said. File it with the county, I guess. Make it official. Cain won't let it go that easy. I know. You'll need help. Abigail looked at him, her eyes steady. Are you offering? Caleb hesitated, then nodded. If you'll have it. Why now? Why after all this time? Because I'm tired of running, he said quietly, and because I owe your grandfather more than I can ever repay, but mostly because I owe you. Abigail's eyes burned. She looked away, blinking hard. The girl on the cot spoke again, her voice soft. What's your name? Abigail. I'm Clara. She paused, then added, You're braver than I am. I'm not brave, Abigail said. I'm just tired of being afraid. Clara smiled, faint but real. That's the same thing. Morning came slowly, the sky shifting from black to gray to pale gold. Dutch arrived just after dawn, his horse moving at an easy trot. He dismounted and knocked once on the cabin door. Caleb opened it. She all right? Dutch asked. She's fine. Dutch nodded, his face lined with exhaustion. Thank you for getting her out. Thank Abigail. She's the one who needed getting out first. Dutch glanced past Caleb, meeting Abigail's eyes. He tipped his hat. Miss. Sir, Abigail said. Clara appeared beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She stepped outside, and Dutch pulled her into a long embrace. I'm sorry, Papa, she whispered. You've got nothing to be sorry for, he said, his voice thick. He lifted her onto his horse, then turned back to Caleb. If you need anything at all, you send word. I will. Dutch mounted behind his daughter and rode away, the morning light catching on his silver hair. Abigail stood in the doorway, the deed still clutched in her hand. Caleb stood beside her, his rifle resting against the doorframe. What now? He asked. Abigail folded the deed carefully and tucked it into her coat. Now we go home. The ride back to the Garrett farm took most of the day. Abigail's father met them at the gate, his face pale and drawn. When he saw her, alive and whole, he nearly collapsed. "Abby!" She slid from the horse and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his chest. He held her tight, his shoulders shaking. "I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you." "I'm here, Papa. I'm here." He pulled back, his eyes red. "Kane." "He's gone," Caleb said, dismounting. "For now." Garrett looked at Caleb, recognition dawning. "Thorne." "Sir." Garrett stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You brought her back." "I did." "Then I owe you more than I can say." "You don't owe me anything," Caleb said. "Your father-in-law already paid that debt." Abigail pulled the deed from her coat and handed it to her father. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, his eyes scanning the paper. "How?" "Caleb kept it safe," Abigail said. "All these years." Her father's jaw worked. He looked at Caleb again, his expression unreadable. Then he extended his hand. Caleb took it. "Thank you," Garrett said simply. 2 days later, Abigail rode into town with her father and Caleb. The deed was filed with the county clerk, witnessed and notarized. Kane's forged document was declared invalid. Word spread fast. By evening, the town knew. Some whispered approval, others muttered about interference, about stirring up trouble. But no one challenged it. Kane didn't return. Some said he'd left the territory entirely, heading west to California. Others claimed he was hiding in the hills, waiting for his moment. Abigail didn't care. The land was hers, legal and binding. She stood on the porch of her grandfather's old house, her house now, and watched the sun set over the valley. The 40 acres stretched before her, golden in the fading light. Caleb leaned against the railing beside her, his hat tipped back. "You going to stay?" Abigail asked. "For a while," he said. "Ah, if that's all right." "It's all right." They stood in silence, the wind rustling through the grass. "You know," Caleb said after a moment, "your grandfather used to sit right here every evening. Said it was the only place he could think." "I remember. He'd be proud of you." Abigail's throat tightened. "You think so?" "I know so." She looked at him, studying the lines around his eyes, the gray at his temples. He'd aged in the years since she'd last seen him. They both had. "I was angry at you for a long time," she admitted. "I know. I'm not anymore." Caleb's expression softened. "Good. That's good." Weeks passed. Abigail worked the land with her father and brother, repairing fences, planting seed. Caleb stayed, helping where he could. Clara came to visit once, riding alongside her father. She looked stronger, her eyes clearer. She and Abigail sat on the porch, drinking lemonade and talking about everything and nothing. "You ever think about leaving?" Clara asked. "Sometimes," Abigail said, "but this is my home. I'm not letting anyone take it from me again." Clara smiled. "Good." One evening, a rider appeared on the road. Not Kane, but a marshal from the territorial government. He carried a letter, sealed and official. Abigail's father opened it, his face grave. "What is it?" Abigail asked. "It's a summons," he said slowly. "For Kane. They're charging him with illegal auctioning, fraud, theft." "Who filed the charges?" Her father looked up. "Dutch Callahan and 20 others." Abigail's breath caught. The community had spoken. The trial was held 3 months later in the territorial capital. Abigail didn't attend, but Dutch sent word when it was over. Kane was sentenced to 10 years in prison, The auctions were shut down, and the valley, for the first time in years, felt quiet. Years later, Abigail would stand on that same porch, watching her own children play in the grass. The 40 acres had grown into 80, then 100. The house had been rebuilt, stronger than before. Caleb stayed. He worked the land beside her, quiet and steady, until the day he couldn't anymore. She buried him on the ridge overlooking the valley next to her grandfather. At the funeral, Dutch Callahan stood beside her, his silver hair now white. "He was a good man," Dutch said. "He was," Abigail agreed. So was your grandfather." "I know." Dutch glanced at her. "You've done right by them both." Abigail didn't answer. She looked out over the valley. The land her grandfather had fought for. The land she'd nearly lost. The land she'd won back, not through violence, not through revenge, but through people who decided they weren't going to let cruelty run their county anymore. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. Abigail turned and walked back toward the house, where her family waited. Behind her the valley stretched wide and still, and somewhere in the wind she could almost hear her grandfather's voice. "Stand for something, Abby, or fall for anything." She'd stood, and she'd won.